Okay guys, it's Jeff, the Godless Scummer, back with another video. This is take 2 of this video, okay, just for the record. I tried to do this once before and I was trying to do my usual video in the pub kind of style. Didn't really work out because of the background noise. So this is take 2. I tried to be summary in this video initially, but hey ho, it still worked out at over 45 minutes. If I can keep it under that, I will do. Okay, so what am I going to talk about whilst I crack open a tinny here? And I would suggest any of you watching, you might want to do the same thing here, because this is it's a long old story. Okay, going to talk about the NonSequitur Show, and I know this is something that's been talked about at a bit at length now over the last 2 or 3 months on the internet. It's a fairly long story, which I'm going to have to be summary on, and I can't go into all the details. This is going to be kind of maybe a personal reflection for me on this whole thing. And we'll see how this goes. Now, the NonSequitur Show. This is I'm talking about this because this was a YouTube channel that I was a massive, it was my favourite channel on YouTube for a while. And just give a bit of the backstory of this. It initially started off as a podcast started by 2 guys, Carl Curtis and Steve McRae. And from what my understanding of it is this, that initially the concept of this was Carl Curtis had this idea for a podcast, and he approached this guy, Steve McRae, to do something together. And as a podcast, and because Carl didn't really have much knowledge or connections or whatever to do something like this, and maybe Steve had some connections to get guests and so on. So kind of how it started, and at some point Steve McRae convinced Carl Curtis to maybe move the whole platform to YouTube and start up a YouTube channel to do this thing on. So yeah, that's kind of I think the genesis of how this thing begun, as to the best of my knowledge. And as I said, I'm going to just try to be as summary as possible. There's going to be a lot of details in this video that I'm probably going to miss out. If I get stuff wrong, I'm sure people are going to jump on me for that. But, you know, I've got to try to condense this to some degree. But I'm going to give my personal reflections on this. My first exposure to the NonSequitur Show kind of came about as from a YouTuber I followed for a long time called Aaron Ra. And he's a debunker of young Earth creationism, and he does a lot of good stuff on like evolution, biology, and phylogeny, which is his sort of main thing that he really is interested in. And I'd heard he announced that he was going to do a face-to-face sort of showdown on this channel NonSequitur with a guy called Kent Hovind, who is a young Earth creationist, and I will say for the record, personal pet hate of mine, this guy Kent Hovind. And he was going to have it on this channel called NonSequitur, and I watched this, and I gotta say, brilliant watch for me, because Aaron Ra absolutely fucking mullered this guy Hovind. He totally destroyed him. And to the point even where certain young Earth creationists were kind of lamenting of the fact that, God, is Kent Hovind the best we got here? You know, it was a beautiful viewing, and I sort of subbed to that channel, NonSequitur Show, at that point. That was just my sort of personal story, how I was introduced to it. How I was introduced to the two hosts, Carl Curtis and Steve McRae. I, never really watched either. I didn't know who either of them were beforehand. So, that was my introduction, and and that was quite early on in the show's history. I don't even know that they'd hit 1,000 subscribers at that point. I'm not quite sure on this, but it was quite early on, and it was maybe the sort of show that this particular thing was maybe what initially put the show on the map. But I subbed to it and began to, watch a few things on this show, the NonSequitur Show. And it seemed to be a show where you had it seems to be a show where you had an awful lot of debate and about a whole number of different topics, whether it be science, religion, philosophy, politics, you name it. You name it. That it seemed to cover a real wide variety of subjects, and the whole sort of principle of the show was to get people with different opinions, different ideas, and where you could have discussions, debates of all kinds. And it really, me personally, I felt it was a really great formula, but it had a real variety of where you could have great sort of intellectual debates about philosophy or science, and then the next night you could have on, I don't know, an astronomer debating with a flat earther or something like that. Now I'll get onto the flat earth thing a little bit later because I've got something to say about that, but it was very good. And the thing that maybe really kind of drew me to it was the two hosts, Carl Curtis and Steve McRae. And there was a great contrast between the two of them. And I think they had a good chemistry, because I think they were very different in their sort of approaches. Now, Kyle had a bit more of a... had quite a charming personality, quite a warm, charming, and engaging personality about him. And Steve, I'd say, I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't say he was certainly isn't dislikable, not at all. But Steve had a very much more matter-of-fact, intellectual kind of demeanour, and, more, very much to the facts. And he had a real depth of knowledge on a very, very wide, amount of subjects. And I just felt, it made for a great, pairing and a great sort of partnership. And I just subbed to this, and after the Hovind Ra thing, and I just became hooked on this particular channel. And I can't think that there's many shows that they did that I didn't watch. I mean, I'll say another personal favourite memory from those early days was when they had a well-known flat earther on called Jeranism to debate a guy called Red's Rhetoric, who's a debunker of flat earth. And I will say this, it was in terms of like, it was a one-sided affair without any doubts that I think destroyed Flat Earth, and its tracks right there and there, because Red's rhetoric absolutely gave this guy Jaredism an intellectual paintbrushing. He was just boom, 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 boom. You know, it was so one-sided. It was absolutely beautiful viewing. But yeah, I thought these guys, Steve and Carl, had really caught lightning in a bottle with this thing. They really had. It was a great formula, and I clearly wasn't the only person who thought this, because from, say, me joining of maybe just under 1,000 subscribers within about a year and a half to the sort of height of this thing, they got up to 30,000 subscribers. So obviously I wasn't the only person who thought this, that they'd really hit something special with this. With the discussions they had on there, and not just the debates, but just some of the interviews they had as well. Like, for example, really at the height of the Non-Sequitur Show's popularity, they had the world famous theoretical physicist Dr. Lawrence Krauss on for an interview, which was, was really good. And also a personal favourite of mine was the high priest of the Satanic Temple, Lucien Greaves, when Stephen Cole interviewed him, and very, again, great interviews, and that but this was the sort of thing you had, this wide mix of different stuff, and it was great. And I said it was lightning in a bottle, they call. What perhaps I didn't realise, just as an outside looking in, that there'd been some problems behind the scenes. Now, I maybe had got some inkling that there was some issues, because I also started following these guys on Twitter, and I had a few interactions with both Steve and Kyle. Well, one thing I kind of noticed about Steve was he had a bit of a tendency to get into some fights on Twitter, and I think Steve's a bit, and I think by his own admission he will admit he can be a bit abrasive, bit blunt, and he's not necessarily going to cater to people's feelings at times. I mean, I will say, I don't think Steve goes out intentionally to hurt people's feelings. That's not what I'm saying. But he can be very, very blunt and brutally honest with people at times, and I think I kind of like that about Steve, but I can see how that rubs some people the wrong way. I really can. So I did kind of notice this. And another thing that went on at the time is there seemed to be other regulars who were all kind of on this show that kind of got elevated to the status of co-hosts. For name a few, Godless Engineer, his wife Casey, this woman Katie Joy Paulson, otherwise known as Without a Crystal Ball. Later on, Shannon Q, and I gotta admit, I do recommend Shannon's channel completely to this day. She does some brilliant content. But they kind of came into there as kind of co-hosts on various different things. Now, maybe as an outsider looking in, I had a bit of a misconception about the Non-Sequitur Show for a little while. Because I didn't really know the background, that I thought this was Kyle's kind of project. And initially it was Steve, but he'd brought up these other people on. I just assumed it was kind of, Kyle's thing, and he's bringing these other sort of people on and whatever. Would find out later that wasn't exactly the case, and we'll get into that in a bit. But that was a misconception I had, for the record. Now, so as I was getting on, I said, yeah, Steve got into a number of Twitter fights, and with some of the other people who were regular guests and, and some of the other, should we say, co-hosts on the NonSequitur Show. So it maybe give me the impression that maybe not everything was hunky-dory behind the scenes or so on. However, so we go on a little while. I started to notice that Steve McRae was appearing on the channel less and less. He seemed to be like, from being on there 4 or 5 times a week, he was going down to once or twice a week, and then I think towards the end or something, he was on there like, what, twice in a month or something. So I thought, it seemed like he was being phased out or something by Kyle here. And I was a bit, as a viewer, I was a bit like, because I quite enjoyed Steve's take on a lot of stuff, and I still do. And I was like, Steve brings a lot to the table here. God, why are you doing this? And I also say that also in the last month or two, that a couple of months or something, before this big thing exploded, that I noticed, and I think a number of other people noticed, that the kind of gist of what the NonSequitur Show was changing. It seemed to be going more in a direction of social justice, LGBTQ rights, atheist activism, a number of things. And now I'm not going to say, because these are all sort of things that I kind of support. I do. But with there's a hell of a lot of activist channels out there, and I was kind of like, what's going on with this? It's not the sort of, it wasn't what attracted me to the NonSequitur Show. It was the debates, the discussions, the in-depth stuff that really attracted me to the NonSequitur Show, and so I noticed there was this kind of change going on. But I didn't, and as I was saying, I'm giving this story as just me being an outsider looking in at the time. Now the whole thing, what I didn't realise is there was a lot going on behind the scenes, more than I realised, more than a lot of people realised. I thought this was going to be a short video, but I'm almost 20 minutes in already. Oh boy. So I think the whole thing kind of came to a head in June this year. And guy I mentioned earlier, Red's Rhetoric, he'd been scheduled to go on with a flat earther, have a debate. But he had been like noticing a lot of the problems behind the scenes, and one thing he sort of said to Carl was, I'm not going to go on there unless Steve McRae is on there with me. Basically, he made that a condition. I'm not going on unless Steve is there. He made that a condition for an appearance. So it's a bit of an argument, and they ended up having a sort of hangout and so on, which was recorded pre-show. Where the whole thing blew up, but I'll come back to that in a minute, because that wasn't my first awareness of the fact that there was a real major problem and there had been a split, because I didn't see this until a day or two after I realised that there had been a blow up. Now, I realised that that obviously Steve hadn't been on a lot, and I know Steve had some arguments and falling outs on Twitter, and that I was well aware of that. But the first thing I really knew, that it got to a point where that it had gone to that point where there was a split and there was this going on here, was I just switched on one day, listen to the NonSequitur Show, which I usually listened to when I went to work in the mornings. That was my thing I'd listen to for a couple of hours to get me in the mood for the day. And it was on an episode about the new independent fundamentalist Baptist church, which I will give the guys credit for, and definitely a hate group that needed to be exposed. However, the first sort of 20 minutes of this show was taken up by Kyle sort of saying that there'd been a big fundamental split between him and Steve, and that Steve had gone public like the previous night or something, and and it just blown up, and it was, it probably wasn't repairable. Now, I hadn't heard necessarily at this point Steve's side of the story, but I got to say, my initial thoughts when this whole blow up happened was I wasn't going to take sides. I was kind of neutral, and if anything, I may have initially in the first 2 or 3 days or so of this had been maybe leaning slightly towards Kyle's side on this. If I had a leaning, it might have been that. However, the events of the next sort of week or two or whatever just totally changed my stance on this. And it became apparent that what had, and I said I was under this impression that this was Kyle's baby or whatever. That was just my impression of it. But it turned out, no, this was a 50-50 partnership. And that was what had been agreed from the beginning. This was a 50-50 deal, a business partnership between Kyle Curtis and Steve McRae. And what I didn't know was that Steve McRae had not seen a single cent from the NonSequitur Show since this thing had started. I didn't know that. But that became apparent. And again, initially, I was a little I was maybe leaning towards a little bit towards Carl, because my initial thought was, Steve, why are you going on blooming Hangouts and making this a public bloody drama or public spectacle? Why are you doing this? You don't need to do this. But once again, as I started to learn more, I maybe understood why Steve was going public with this stuff and why he felt he had no other option at this point. Because it turned out that he, for a number of months, had been trying to get the financial reports from Carl, the books, we'll call them the books from here on, but basically the financials. So, he was trying to get that sort of record and so on from Kyle. So, and I'm skipping over a lot here. There's a hell of a lot I know I'm skipping over. I'll take a little detour at this point, right, to suggest if people really, really want to get into the real details of this, there's a whole number of channels, but one I would recommend is a channel called In Time, with Nick Suda and Ansgar Odinson, who've done 3 shows upon this topic alone, where they've done a real deep dives into all the details of the NonSequitur Show, the breakup, and to where we're getting to and where I'm going to get to by the end of this video, and we're 25 minutes in and I still nowhere near the end. Okay, so as maybe things started to develop over the next week or two, one thing that came to light was that there was this meeting or whatever that had been recorded, which I kind of referenced earlier, with Red's Rhetoric, Steve McRae, the producer, Bull, and Kyle. And the end result of that was Kyle ended up locking Steve and Bull out of the NonSequitur channel. Effectively, what he had done at that point was effectively done a hostile takeover, and he'd done it whilst being recorded. and he had on this hangout, it's interesting because he basically admitted it was a 50-50 partnership between the two of them. And he'd also, for the record, had said something about, hey, let's try this in a court of public opinion, Steve. Which maybe maybe led me to understand why Steve had gone on this public offensive about this, because effectively Kyle had kind of said, hey, we'll do this in a court of public opinion, and Steve called his bluff on it effectively. But it was also kind of the case that Steve had been trying to get this sort this out in private for months, and he felt he had no choice but to go public at this point. I get that now. At the time, I was like, Steve, why are you making a spectacle of this? But, you know, that was my thought. Now, you know, once this information comes to light, I was like, okay, now I get it. I get it now. A few things sort of started to happen after that. A number of things for starters. There was, and again, there was a number of accusations that were made against Steve from the kind of Kyle's camp and Kyle's kind of supporters, and maybe some of the other co-hosts that had been involved. One big thing that was mentioned was there was an accusation that Steve was attempting some kind of a fraud with either a tax or medical. One of the co-hosts had Casey Paulson had suggested that he was trying to defraud the US Veterans Association. For those that don't know, Steve McRae is ex-US Navy. He's an ex-veteran, and you know, now being British, I don't know an awful lot about the US VA, but it took me less than 15 to 20 minutes worth of research to go on there and kind of realise that, well, actually, it didn't really matter what Steve's income was, that he'd have been entitled to this VA stuff anyway. So how was the fuck was he defrauding him? I didn't get it. It was like, and this became a sort of thing from that side, and perhaps why I personally started to swing more and more towards Team McRae on this whole thing, was what was coming from Kyle's side didn't make sense. The more and more stuff come out, it did not make sense, and what Steve was saying made sense, and he was backing shit up on this as well. He was like providing the evidence, and it was like, okay, you had to get to a certain point where it's like, I've tried to stay neutral in this thing long enough, but this is fucking overwhelming now. Kyle is bullshitting here and Steve is telling the truth. It became overwhelming to me that who was in the right and who was in the wrong with this. It just became overwhelming after a while. A little bit further on, and there was a sort of hangout, I believe, that was arranged between Kyle, Steve, Ball, Red's Rhetoric, who acted kind of as a mediator of this, and I forget the guy's name. I think it was Rue Hiff or something. I can't forget the name. So, but he was briefly acting as Steve's power of attorney, not attorney, but a power of attorney. The guy who knows Steve, knew the law, and was helping Steve out here. I don't quite know the relationship. Sure Steve would be more than happy to elaborate on that if I asked him. But you know, I'm just doing it. And I sort of heard that this thing was going to happen. I'd seen online this thing was going to take place, and I thought, great, okay. Kyle has finally come to his fucking senses, and he realised that he fucked up, and that he's going to try and make things right. And okay, maybe this, so I really was kind of like hoping, great, this is going to be an amicable solution to this once and for all. And I believe one of the things is Kyle had promised he was going to bring the books, the financials to this meeting or whatever, and they were going to sort it all out. Lo and behold, within a week, found out that was not what happened there. He made a number of promises. Kyle promised he was going to come with the books. He didn't come with the books, and he said, "Oh, they'll be with you in like 2 or 3 days, Steve." And 2 or 3 days went by. By a week, Steve was like, "No, I've got to go fucking public with this shit again and say, hey, Kyle, you're fucking bullshitting here." And it was clearly a stalling tactic. It was clearly Kyle was stalling this. At which point, Steve effectively said, "Then I'm not going to try and negotiate this." Basically, at this point, so I'm going for actual legal litigation against Kyle Curtis. At this point, he basically decided, I'm taking him to court, and then it gets a bit even funnier after that. Kyle had done another stream where he had said very publicly he had a lawyer, and this was going, and all the stuff was being dealt with through an attorney of his. He'd even said at one point, and I'm not quite sure the timeline in which hangout this was in, but he had said that all the stuff Steve had been saying publicly had been sent to this lawyer and was going to be examined and, used as evidence, which was a bit of a weird thing. Just to me, it seemed a bit weird, because I thought, that's a lot of stuff to be sent to a lawyer that you're going to be paying for by the hour, and, and lawyers aren't cheap. So, there was a few sort of things there. Even then, I was like, this doesn't make sense. And one of the things Kyle had said, I would have sorted this whole thing. I would have shown Steve the books. I would have shown my business part, but his lawyer advised him that he might be implicated in some sort of fraud if he did that, and that Kyle's lawyer might be implicated in some sort of fraud. I believe that's kind of what he said. Again, made zero fucking sense to me, and I know jack shit, especially about US law, because I'm British. I don't know about fuck all about US law, but it's like, actually, I was like, and it was weird, because like Kyle even said, well, I'm not going to publish the name of my lawyer because I don't want my lawyer to be trolled by people who are fans of Steve's. And it's like, you don't have to give your name of your lawyer out publicly. All you got to do is get him to contact Steve's attorney. It's like common practice. That's pretty much common practice worldwide, I'd have thought. It was like, so this is all like, this is bullshit. This is, Kyle, you're spitting bullshit. That was just more evidence to me that, like, no, Kyle is full of shit here, and he's bullshitting people. So, okay. So, Steve eventually obviously files this quite long complaint against Kyle for frauds. There's a whole number of stuff. The documents, I'll say, Steve McRae has released this, and it's been released in the public domain anyway by the courts of North Carolina. Okay, just so people are aware, this is in the public domain. It's stuff you can look up on this. And it was filed sometime towards the end of August, and effectively to cut a long story short, Kyle had 30 days. 30 days to respond to this lawsuit after he'd been served. And we do know that he was served with the papers. We do know this. And he didn't respond. No lawyer got in touch with Steve's legal team. Nothing. Zero. Zip. So basically at the end of the 30 days, effectively the case, basically this is effectively an automatic default win for Steve McRae. Kyle's defaulted the whole case, and then when he told people that he had a lawyer, he said all this stuff. He said all this stuff about like Steve committing, fraud and so on. And it's clear to me Kyle Curtis has basically taken a lot of people in the community for a fucking ride. He really has. He has lied for his teeth, and he's run away from this, and he's not answered it. I should mention at this point, and again, I'm not saying anything that's not already out in the public record because Kyle Curtis has spoken about this publicly. Kyle Curtis does have a criminal record going back a number of years ago, which I suppose we always want to give people the second chance and whatever, and that's why I like, kind of one of the reasons I like Kyle, that he admitted that he made mistakes in his past and he had some issues. And one of the things I didn't know until all this came out was that one of the things he put in trouble for was not showing up in court when he was supposed to. And he's kind of done that again. That's not going to look good for him at all. So where we are in terms of legal things at this point is that Steve McRae can ask for a summary judgment. Now, from what I understand of the case, it's very likely that I think it's more than likely he's going to be awarded to the NonSequitur Show channel, and probably a lot of the assets of that channel and that partnership that were mentioned in the complaint. I would think it's a good likelihood he's going to be awarded this. And just for the record, he's defaulted the case. The judgment is still to come. Okay, that's where we are at the moment. Now, if I have to follow up on this, mate, on whatever the judgment may be in a future video, I'll do that. Okay, but that, now I promise you that'll be a lot fucking shorter than this, is because we're in almost 40 minutes into this, and I promise people I am barely scratched the surface of all this. I promise you on this, I have scratched the surface and we're almost 40 minutes in. So yeah, so there we are. So Steve will be asking for a summary judgment. It's a good chance that he's going to hit the channel. I believe in the lawsuit he's claimed for something around $30,000. However, in the state of North Carolina, and because of the fact that he's alleging, Steve has claimed fraud and something else, that he can avoid for triple damages, which puts it up to say $90,000. And he could claim legal expenses back here. Potentially, Kyle is looking at $100,000 against him here. And I'd say, obviously, this is, I'm just speculating worst case scenario. It could be around 100,000 or maybe in excess of, and giving up the channel and assets and whatever of NonSequitur. That would be a huge judgment against Kyle Curtis, and I would suggest for Kyle Curtis's sake, here's what I'm going to say, Kyle. Okay, Kyle, you probably won't watch this. I doubt you will. However, you've had your chance to fight back. You've had your chance to. You told all people all this stuff. You had a lawyer and everything. Clearly you didn't. You've had your chance to fight back. Right now, you got to take your medicine like a man, alright, Carl? You really should do. You're fucked up big time here, and you need to take your medicine. Now, maybe you won't. Maybe you're going to just, walk away from this or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what your intentions would be at this point. I don't. I would suggest to you, for your own sake, that you do just take your medicine on this one and not try and run from this or ignore this, because you could be putting yourself, then potentially, from what I understand, you could be putting yourself potentially into the case of a criminal thing. And hey, you said yourself you don't want to go back to prison. You've said that yourself, and you never want to go back there again. If I were you, Carl, take your fucking medicine like a man at this point. Seriously, really. I hope you had your chance to fight this. Barring some real really unlikely extenuating circumstances here, you do not have an argument left. You really don't. So, Carl, you got to take this like a man now, and take your medicine. Which you made this bed for yourself. You're gonna have to lie in it now. Seriously. Okay, so that's my things on that. However, I've got to close up on something. I've got to address some of Kyle's supporters in this thing before I close off. Some of you, something that mention my name. Godless Engineer, KC, Katie Paulson, Mr. Atheist, to name a few. Now, I've got to say, with each and every one of these people, whatever interactions I've had have been very positive, very nice, and pleasant. I mean, Casey in particular, I've had some very lovely interactions with Casey. I've had some very positive interactions with Godless Engineer. Not so much with Katie and Jimmy. I mean, I'm not having anything negative really to say, but this has got to be addressed. Now, actually, I should sidetrack right here. And I'm only going to touch on this briefly because I've gone over almost 45 minutes already. And just to talk about Katie Paulson would be another video in itself. But the brief story is she kind of, just under a week ago or something, she kind of came out of a video where she effectively tried to distance herself from Kyle. It was, I suppose you could say, it was a half-hearted apology to Steve. But she basically said that Kyle lied to her for the whole time, and it was some doubt. And it was one of Kyle's biggest supporters spoke out and saying, no, this guy's fucking lied, and whatever. But the weird thing is, within 24 hours, she'd taken it down. And look, there's a whole load of crap around that I'm not going to get into because, as I said, I've been going almost 45 minutes already, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole in itself, okay? So I'll address the other three. Godless Engineer, KC, Mr. Atheist. I'm going to say, look, this isn't an attack. And as I said, I've had some very, very pleasant interactions with all you. This is not an attack. And for the record, and I want to make you be really, really fucking clear on this to people who watch this, do not go and fucking harass these guys online, okay? I want to be really clear about that. I don't want that. I do not condone that. Now, I'm probably going to be kinder on these people than perhaps some people are willing to be. And as I said, and maybe it's a flaw of mine, I don't know. I like to try and always look for the best in people. Sometimes that perhaps works to my detriment. It did with Katie, because I thought, with that whole thing when she made the apology, I thought, hey, maybe this girl's got some honour after all, and I don't know, shit happened there. But maybe it's a fault of mine, but I maybe want to give you guys the benefit of the doubt, even if other people are not willing to at this point. You don't want to be staying silent on this, any of you. You've all made claims, and one of the things you've all said is, hey, Steve will get paid. That clearly wasn't going to happen. Now, I want to believe that you were just being strung along. I want to believe that. Now, I know there's been, especially just before I even recorded this, there was some shit being flown KC's way about, because for the record, like, Carl was apparently starting this new channel, which is going to be like a culinary thing, and I believe Casey's getting involved, and some people have speculated, well, yeah, she was in on this shit all along. I don't know that. I can't say it because I don't have enough evidence to say that. And I will say, like I said, I'm not going to bash Casey, especially Casey, because I've had some interactions, I've had some DMs with Casey, and she's been lovely to me, and so I'm not going to knock her. GE's always been nice to me. Jimmy, I've had some interactions with, not negative, we can't say we're, really equated, but seriously though, guys, you don't want to be staying silent on this. You really don't. If it's clear that Carl's lied for his teeth. Now, if Carl has lied to you guys and he's led you on, and I understand wanting to stand behind a friend, I get it. I understand when you want to stand behind someone who's a really good friend, but he's clearly lied through his fucking teeth here. There's got to come a point where you got to say, shit, he's misled people, because right now, here's how a lot of people in the community perceive you, and how they're going to perceive you, and it's going to spread to your fan bases real soon. Believe me it will, because this story is going to get a lot bigger than you may think it will. I think this is going to be a big YouTube story. Might be NonSequitur Show might have only had 30,000 subscribers. Not a big thing when you think of YouTube, but I think this thing has potential to get a lot bigger. And I know there's some big YouTubers, that may be covering this in the future. I'm a tiny little YouTuber. You guys may want to make your positions clear. If you've been lied, now, if Carl has led you on, you may need to come clean with that now. For your own sakes. That's my advice to you. Especially you, Mr. Atheist, because you got a lot to fucking lose, son. You got a big following right now. Many of your followers may not know, know quite what they might know you done live streams with this guy, with Carl, but might not know a bit of background. But I know you might be ignoring it right now, but I've been on some of the comment sections of your videos, and I've seen the people who are asking questions, and I'm just saying to you, Jimmy, I like your content, mate. I do. And I totally supported you, and I will still support you with that whole shit with the NIFB. Totally. Was totally on board with the pumpkin thing. Still am. I did the Tommy McMurtry video, about the pumpkins. So I'm with you on that one, but do not underestimate any of you guys how damaging this could be to your reputations if you don't address this. Now, I'm not saying you need to sort of do a big kumbaya with Steve. From what I get, I don't reckon Steve's going to accept your apologies anyway, quite frankly, but I don't think he will do. He's, you know, you may, you know, that's a bridge you guys may have burnt. Hey, you might not want to make friends with Steve. I don't think you probably would. You don't, but I'm saying you don't have to like Steve, but you do have to acknowledge, all of you, that Kyle was wrong here and that Kyle has lied. You've got to acknowledge that for your own sakes. And if he's lied to you as well, come clean about it. Come clean about it now for your own sakes. That is just my heartfelt advice to you guys. Okay. Oh my God, we're over 50 minutes already. And this is just, and I promise you, like I said, this has been a summary. I have barely scratched the surface of all the shit that's happened here. I really have. If there are people who really do want to get into all the nitty gritty and all the real details, I really suggest going to Nick and Ansgar's channel In Time and going to watch that. I'll give a shout out to Unirock as well. I know he's covered this story in great detail. I know Drunken Peasants actually have covered this because Steve's been on there a few times. They've got him, and I know I was going to say this. I do know they offered the same platform to Kyle, but Kyle never came forward with that. So I'm going to conclude. How do I conclude? First, I suppose should conclude by saying, first of all, I suppose a congratulations in a sense to Steve McRae, because you've been vindicated about a lot of the shit that's been thrown your way. You have been. You've been vindicated on this, and I do hope you get that channel back, and I hope. I'm under no illusions that Kyle's got a shit ton of money. I mean, my guess is, and I think the general kind of consensus is, and you probably know yourself, probably Kyle blew all the money for the Non-Sec show. Whatever it made, he probably spent it. Good chance of it. But I do hope you get compensated, because I know. Let's just say that I know when, you know, this non-sec thing blew up, it was like Steve wasn't even necessarily so much concerned about his own financial future as like, I think he was hoping to build a little bit of a nest egg for his daughter out of this. And so I seriously hope that Steve gets something financially out of this as well, and not just for his own sake, but for his daughter, because I think that was a big part of his motivation for doing a non-sex show. And when it took off, it was like, you know, hey, you know, but I do hope, whether Steve gets his channel back or not, and whatever Carl decides to do with this, that's on him. But I do hope, whether it's he gets his channel back or something new start, that something as a fan, that I hope something is created that is within the spirit of what the Non-Sequitur Show was supposed to be. Now, will it have? I don't know. I mean, Steve's got a great co-host called Cheshire at the moment. Love her a bit. She's brilliant. They're really good. They're a really good team. I know? I'm not necessarily sure if they got the whole lightning in a bottle thing that perhaps Steve and Carl had. I don't know, but they're a good team. But if they can bring something to the table that is within the spirit of what the Non-Sequitur Show was supposed to be, then I think we as people who like watching YouTube videos are in for a treat. If they can bring something like that to pass. And I hope, hopefully it will be on the Non-Sequitur channel itself. if not something that is within the spirit of what that show was meant to be, and what we really need in this community of great discussions, great debates, great arguments, and some damn good entertainment and fucking dumpster fires thrown in for good measure. Alright, that's been my long old video about this. I have been Jeff the Godless Scummer, and I shall sign off. Salute.